Officer Bill Carson leaned against his squad car, sipping coffee and scanning the parking lot for anything that might disrupt his otherwise quiet shift. He was nearing the end of his career, hardened by years on the force, but his perspective hadn't evolved with the times. A few cars pulled into the lot, but his eyes narrowed as a black SUV drove in and parked. A tall black woman stepped out, carrying herself with an air of confidence and authority. Carson felt something click in his mind, a prejudice buried yet often present. "What's she up to?" he muttered under his breath. The woman, Captain Lydia Coleman, had just been transferred to the precinct after a successful career in a neighboring city. A pioneer in her field, she'd worked tirelessly to earn the respect of her peers. Coleman was here to evaluate the precinct's policies, focusing on fairness in policing. However, she kept her position as captain under wraps for now, preferring to observe anonymously to get a raw look at the culture. As Lydia walked toward the precinct, Officer Carson's posture stiffened. Without hesitation, he blocked her path, his hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am, I need to see some ID." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "ID? I'm just here to—" "Don't make this difficult," Carson interrupted, his voice laced with condescension. He was accustomed to people immediately submitting to his authority, and he expected no less from her. "Officer," Lydia said firmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here on business." "Business, huh?" Carson's eyes narrowed, his tone icy. "We don't get many people like you coming in on business. Hand over your ID, or I'll have to take you in." Lydia's jaw clenched as she pulled out her wallet, but she paused before handing it over. She knew this officer was acting out of prejudice, but her mission was important, and her cover couldn't be blown just yet. "Look, I don't want any trouble," she replied evenly. "I'm here as part of a transfer. I'd like to keep this interaction civil." Carson scoffed. "I'll decide what's civil." He glanced at her wallet. "You better not be causing problems around here." The disrespect was blatant, and Lydia could feel her patience wearing thin. However, she maintained her composure, determined not to escalate the situation. But Carson wasn't finished. He took her silence as submission and started questioning her in a demeaning tone about why she was in the area, assuming she was up to no good. "Look," Lydia interrupted, her voice calm but steely. "I'm here to observe, and I'd prefer to do so without further interference. You can check with your superior if you're unclear on the matter." Carson laughed. "Oh, you think you're important enough to be talking to my superior? The only place you're going is the holding cell." Before Lydia could respond, Carson handcuffed her, ignoring her protests. "You can explain yourself downtown," he sneered, oblivious to the reality of who he was detaining. To Lydia, it was shocking but sadly familiar. Even with her rank, she was still judged and mistreated, but she reminded herself that moments like these were why her work was so vital. In the squad car, Lydia's mind raced. She could see Carson glancing at her with barely hidden satisfaction, his grin smug. It was obvious he enjoyed the power trip. Lydia stayed quiet, choosing not to reveal her identity just yet. She wanted to see how this precinct operated and how far Carson would go. Her silence unnerved him slightly, but his pride prevented him from backing down. Arriving at the precinct, Carson led Lydia inside, and she noticed the mixed reactions among the other officers. Some looked away awkwardly, while others seemed amused. As she was processed and escorted toward a holding cell, Carson's demeanor was unapologetically arrogant. "Look around," he said. "Get used to it here. You might be seeing it a lot more if you keep acting up." Lydia held his gaze. "You're making a mistake, Officer Carson." "Oh, I don't think so," he replied, his tone dripping with disdain. Lydia said nothing more as she was led into the holding cell. Inside, she sat on the bench, her mind already strategizing. She'd seen officers like Carson before, officers who believed their authority justified any action they took. The realization of her position when it came would be a bitter pill for him to swallow. She only hoped that her ordeal would set a precedent, reminding the precinct of the values it should uphold. Lydia was still sitting in the holding cell when a younger officer, visibly uncomfortable, approached her. "Ma'am," He began hesitantly. I don't understand why you're here. I overheard some things and, well, I think there's been a mistake. Lydia studied him, noting the worry in his eyes. Here was someone who clearly didn't share Carson's disregard. I'd appreciate any help you can offer, she replied quietly, but please don't reveal my position just yet. The officer nodded, clearly in over his head but respectful. He left quickly, leaving Lydia to her thoughts, but she felt hopeful knowing there were officers like him around. Soon she heard raised voices echoing down the hall. Carson's booming tones were unmistakable, and as she listened closely, she heard him defending his actions, oblivious to the truth that was about to unfold. Finally, the precinct's captain, a grizzled veteran named Captain Lawson, entered the holding area. Spotting Lydia, his face fell. Good Lord, what has Carson done now? He motioned for her to step out, and she complied, shaking off the lingering weight of her ordeal. Lydia's eyes met his, and Lawson sighed, understanding the situation in an instant. Captain Coleman, Lawson said in a low, steady voice, his respect apparent, I am beyond embarrassed that you had to experience this. Please, let's go to my office. We'll sort this out right away. As they walked past the squad room, Lydia caught sight of Carson, his confident posture faltering as he recognized her. His face went pale and his mouth opened in shock. Lydia held his gaze, her expression resolute. She was determined that her experience would lead to tangible change within this precinct. Once in Lawson's office, he listened attentively as she recounted the events, leaving out no detail. His expression grew darker with each word. Carson's behavior is inexcusable, and I assure you there will be consequences. Your experience here today speaks to a larger issue we need to address. Lydia nodded. I came here to observe how this precinct operates, and while I knew there'd be challenges, I never imagined I'd face such blatant disrespect. I'm here to make a difference, and that starts with accountability. Lawson agreed, visibly troubled. We're grateful to have someone of your caliber here, Captain Coleman. I promise you, Carson won't get away with this. He'll face a disciplinary review, and we'll implement reforms to prevent this from happening again. The following morning, Officer Carson was summoned to the captain's office, visibly shaken. As he stepped inside, he noticed Lydia standing beside Lawson. Her gaze was steady, unyielding. Officer Carson, she began, her voice calm but commanding, your actions yesterday were unprofessional and deeply troubling. Carson swallowed hard, the gravity of his mistake dawning on him. I didn't know, he stammered. You didn't care to know, Lydia corrected. Your job as an officer is to serve and protect, not to make assumptions based on your prejudices. My position shouldn't matter. You should treat every person with respect. Lawson added, Carson, you've been with us for years, but this behavior cannot continue. You'll undergo sensitivity training and will be placed on probation. Any further misconduct and you'll face termination. Carson's face reddened with embarrassment, but Lydia held no sympathy. She hoped this would be a wake-up call for him and for any others who shared his views. As he left the office, Lydia turned to Lawson. This is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm committed to making this precinct a place where everyone is treated fairly. The story of Lydia's confrontation spread quickly within the department, serving as a powerful reminder of accountability. For Lydia, it was a step toward the justice and respect she'd spent her life fighting for. She'd taken the first step, knowing that real change wouldn't come easily, but determined to see it through. And now, with her position acknowledged, she would continue her work, ensuring that every officer remembered the oath they'd sworn to uphold.